We're very pleased to welcome James and Victoria from Loyn Co. They discovered that they have many friends in the audience who won't put them off in any way. They are Mansion Medal winners for one of the projects that we're going to show. And the three projects will be ways of approaching homes, houses and housing. So very pertinent to lots of people in the room, different projects which we're doing, and we're very pleased to have these.
Thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. We're from Loyn Co architects. We're based in Cardiff in South Wales, just outside of Cardiff. And we're going to tell you a bit about some of the work we've done, and like you said, our approach, kind of specifically with this lecture in terms of how we approach a one-off kind of bespoke house, and then how we transfer that into multi-housing and public realm, and how people live in general. So this is our studio. We're based in a house in Cardiff, and we're in the attic on the top floor. We're due to move quite soon to our own premises. We're kind of growing up as a practice, moving out of the house and getting our own space. But the studio environment is really important to us and how we work as a team. There's 8 of us, a mixture of kind of architects, designers and sort of students. And I think it gets said a lot, but we really feel that the studio atmosphere and the kind of collective approach to design and reviewing designs gives much more fulfilling kind of solutions. And I think with a lot of our projects, we look at them as individual kind of architects or job runners, and quite often it's difficult to see what came from where, and you know that you had kind of a crit along the way or a discussion along the way, and it's really made that design much richer. So the studio environment really suits us to kind of achieving that, and it's a lot to do with our approach. This isn't a particularly impressive map, but I put it on just to give an idea of the range of work we do. We were established in 1992, so we've been going for a fair while. And I think it's fair to say that when we first started, we had quite a range of projects. We didn't really, we kind of had an approach to architecture, but not necessarily a very focused path. 2 projects that were kind of, well, I guess were kind of flagship projects for us are Raisdale House in Cardiff, which we won our RBA award for back in kind of 1999, and a completely different project at Dot Art Centre, which was kind of in the name, but again, very local to Cardiff. And then I think we've been known over the last 20 years or so, we've kind of developed a reputation for working with people, with individuals on how they live. So whether that be a refurbishment or extension to existing property alterations, or more recently kind of individual bespoke houses for people, and now taking that to the next level and actually master planning and multi-house developments. But we like to try and have a kind of consistency of approach throughout that. And you can see, I think, we're to the grey dots at the bottom. And site is very important to us, and that proximity to site, for being able, first of all, to get there in the early stage of the project, to understand context, and then from start to finish, being able to, in terms of when the project's on site, regularly attend site meetings and meet with contractors and things. So I think it kind of sums up our approach quite well. So it's not coming out great, but I've just put a couple of rows on there of 2 projects which I think show our approach, which is very much about starting with the site and the client brief. And we like to develop a very clear concept from that early on in terms of our kind of response to our analysis. And then it's very important for us that that gets carried right through to the end of the building. And the project at the top is 8 News Houses in Pontcanna, which is kind of residential area in the centre of Cardiff, and the one below is Inside Outside House, which James will go on to talk about a bit. So we're going to talk about 3 projects. James is going to talk about Stormy Castle, which is the project we won the Mansion Medal for last year, which is the best house in the UK, basically. And then Inside Outside, which is kind of a sister project to that, but will hopefully show how, even with kind of similarities, those 2 the individual clients can make such a difference to the outcome of the project. And then I'm going to talk about a project in Cardiff Bay for about 100 homes that we've been working for the last 3 or so years. So, over to James.
Thank you. Hi, so I'm going to try and compress about 5 years worth of joy and pain into hopefully an understandable lecture about Stormy Castle. So, what is Stormy Castle? First of all, it's an existing building. You can see up here where we are. We're just on the north of Gower in Wales, and the existing site used to look like that. There was an existing house and 2 agricultural buildings. And the site itself, you can see on this side here, is extremely prominent. Just press and a little hand there. It sits on a ridge that is both visible from the north and from the south. So this is the existing building here on the barn and the existing building here. We were approached back in 2008 by the owners of the site, who lived internationally, but always owned this as their family home. They're a Welsh family, and they wanted to plan their retirement, and they wanted to move back to this building. So the house itself was a pretty grim, originally a farmhouse that had been modified, and apologies if anyone lives in anything similar to this, but it certainly wasn't worthy of such a spectacular site. From the moment I stepped on and anyone on the team walked onto the site, you could see it was just unbelievable. I honestly think that probably wouldn't work on something so special for the rest of my career. Maybe that sounds depressing, I don't know. So you can see the prominence of the building, in particular here. A photo taken 5 miles away. And remember, we are in an area of Wales that is known for its beauty. It's an area of outstanding national beauty. So the challenge of the brief was essentially to try and provide the accommodation that the client desired in a highly visible, prominent site. So the existing house was about 200 metres squared in its footprint. Sorry, in its overall accommodation, so its footprint was even smaller than that. And what we were trying to do, and eventually did, was to provide 8,000 square feet on the site. And so we knew straight away that it was going to be a project where we had to somehow embed the building into the site. So, first impressions of the site. Here it is again, the existing building that borders onto National Trust land, so anyone can walk along this element of the ground, even today. The first building we can see here is the old schoolhouse, originally dating back to the mid-19th century. And you can see it was just used as an agricultural store, crudely modified with a monopitch roof as opposed to the original dual pitch. And these sort of corten, or they're not corten, because they're steel, but they've slowly rusted, and they're giving the tones of what we now know as corten and corten product. Also, you can see the bracken, the materiality of the site. So these were kind of the first sort of musings of the context, if you like, for us. You can see some of the first sketches. The top right of this one, just here, the existing barn. What do we retain? Do we retain these barns? And that's what we decided to do. So, let me get back to what I'm talking about. So early on, we began to develop ideas in our studio with me, a bit shabby with longer hair, and Chris, a few years younger. And we began to look at the bracken that led us to this idea that we wanted to use corten, so that it would tone with the bracken materials that you'll see later in the photos. And we began to look at how we would provide that accommodation into such a highly visible site. And we arrived basically at this rather simplistic idea that in the past the hill exists, in present we've got this awful house on it with the 2 buildings either end. And what we wanted to do was return it in the future to closer to what the original hill was like and embed the buildings inside the hill. So we began along that vein, and many hours of debates and discussions in the studio began to sort of build up this idea of a building. Early on we decided that being an earth shelter, we felt the most appropriate construction method would be concrete. playing along the lines of wanting the material to be a self-finished material that was also how the building was built. So the face of the concrete would be exposed and the honesty of the construction would be exposed. This tied in with the agricultural context of the site, the low maintenance that the client desired, and our approach as a practice in general. You can see here some of these are the watercolour studies of how we may link to the existing barn and how we would get the best views from the site through the different times of the day. So we've essentially, here in this slide, arrived at our more or less our solution, which was 3 wings cut into the hillside, 1, 2, 3, comprising 5 different levels, and utilising the existing break in the boundary wall that ran along the outside of the site that we saw earlier, banking onto the National Trust land. And so when we removed the old house that was located there, we slotted in our new level on the same footprint at the same level. So the biggest kind of bit of debate amongst us all and organisations like the DCFW was this one element of the building that poked up, if you like, and was more prominent than anywhere else, and that was what we began to call the pavilion, and latterly the energy pavilion, because it was the highest point and had all the solar photovoltaics and sort of thermal on top of it. And you can see here, basically, that this was running north to south along the top of the site. You can see how we were starting to try and understand how that would work, and even in some cases in the top image, removing the pavilion entirely, which perhaps going down the line of returning the hill to its original form was more appropriate. However, at this point, you've got a client along the way with you, and it did provide the accommodation they required and the spectacular views. The higher you got, the further out of the hill you got, the more you could see the 270-degree view. So, as you can imagine, I'm trying to now give you an idea of something that took a long time to debate and eventually decide on what we felt was right. This is, again, another study where we took away the pavilion, and the dotted profile shows you the existing buildings. You can see how lower impact our proposal was. And then, when we're more or less there, we started to look at how our building would convince the planners that it's something we could do, and convince the very active societies that protect that part of the world. So you can see on the existing photos of the existing house, the wonderful views beyond. This is the existing barn, and what we were proposing. And the basic message here was it's lower impact. It's 4 times the size, but it's lower impact because of the way the accommodation was embedded into the site. So once we get closer to a final idea, we start to model it in a more presentable way, if you like. And so you can see here, hopefully, the 3 levels. 1, 2, 3, with the barn at the top, and now the pavilion rotated in its final position. And there are 5 levels in the building, and you can almost work them out here. This is the entrance in, then you step up, or step down half a level, step up and back, and step up again into the pavilion. So at this point, we were almost ready to go to planning, and we spoke to local communities, and when they see things like this, they probably get a bit scared. So we dressed it up a little bit with some greenery and some plants to try and give an impression of what we were going to do. And one of the critical things about the scheme overall was the fact that we were creating these terraces, level areas close to the house, that meant the hillside was more usable for the family. But it did provide problems such as falling off. So what we had here was this idea of, we didn't want glass balustrades everywhere or metal railings. What we did was apply glass in very limited areas where you get a view. And the rest of the guarding was provided by gorse, a plant found on the site, unknown in the surrounding areas. but by its nature is very sort of defensive, and so you wouldn't want to find yourself climbing through any of that. So this is the scheme as we found ourselves putting it into planning. And I'll just try and briefly, what I want to do is try to talk about the plans quite a bit and how, whilst it appears to be quite a stark and modern house in the images, it really works. And that's, again, something personally and as a practice where we strive to produce. So, we have the site entrance here. This is the old schoolhouse that I spoke about, and the first building you see. The drive all the way up, and then you've got the 3 lines, 1, 2, 3. This is true to north, and so you can see the pavilion then rotated, enjoys the southern views, as does this pergola. There's your existing barn, the existing wall, and the old schoolhouse, and dotted on there, the profile of the existing building and how it projected into that wall. These are some of what I wish I could say were my watercolours, but they're not. Explaining the site as you'd never see it on the sky. And again, you can see the similarities and the gauze and the levels and the way in which we've applied Corten gently in selected areas. And that's from the other side of the house. So, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the plans at this stage to give you an idea of how the house works in detail. So, you actually enter on the middle plan, which is this one here. So, you have the entranceway into a covered entrance and into this ground hall with a staircase that takes up the first level. Then you've got a dining space, a kitchen, hidden with pantry and utility. That enjoys all of the views out on the sort of west of the site. Hidden along this sort of the buried part of the house are the service rooms, the garage, the cloaks, the wine cellar, see. Moving down the stairs, you go to the sleeping wing, which is the lowest of the 3 lines, which you're provided with all the plant, again, organised to do with the orientation and the priorities of the spaces. And then 3 bedrooms along the front, what we call the multi-room here, which was a 4th bedroom, rarely to be used, that was left open, so that when you came down these stairs into this dark underground space, you opened this door and you were all of a sudden in almost like a hidden surprise lounge. As part of the planned application, we produce these things called landscape visual impact assessments, and they are virtually like photo montages, as you can see. These were actually produced by the landscape architects that worked with us, Camerons. You can see here, it works relatively successfully, the impact of what we think the house is going to look like, and obviously you'll see these views as we move forward. So, there was the house. Gone with our proposal. Hidden. So, 4 years later, this is what we're left with. The site has been cleared, the existing house is gone, the elements that would be retained remain, and the whole is cut out. So we commenced site, as I say, in 2013. And what I thought I would try and do now is take you on a journey through the building. So, as I said, there's the location, this is all the National Trust land, this is the public highway, and so you actually get to the site up this track. The first building you see is the old schoolhouse. If you continue around, which is what we're going to do first, there's the old schoolhouse, this is the first building you see. Rather subtle, rather quiet, appropriate language for the context. You move around the site, and this is what you can see. Rather discreet, the Corten toning with the bracken in the foreground, and even a sheep, which, believe it or not, I chased to be in the photo. And what we're going to do is we're just flipping back and forth. So I'm trying to show you, I can assure you these are the drawings that went in as part of the design and access. And I think going back to what Victoria said at the beginning, this is what we pride ourselves on as a practice. We produce the buildings we say we will. That's the view from the north. Again, infill the slot where the old house was, keep the barn, a well-known vernacular shape, infill, every existing opening retained and infilled with Court End. And again, going back to what it used to look like. As you move into the site, as I think you'll agree when we see it in a moment, the building looks completely different from the two aspects. You've got the public view, which is rather quiet, hopefully, and then what you see when you're inside the site. The building starts to emerge from the landscape until you're there. I should say, the photos we'll show you now were taken in the beginning of 2014, when the landscape, a critical element of this scheme, had not established. So, we start the journey inside. So the Court End and the concrete actually run into the building, something we carefully negotiated with the client to try and, again, take on our approach of having the honesty of the construction. The buildings, the walls that are structural are all concrete, the walls that aren't are expressed in plasterboard. Court End was used in parts to kind of bring the agricultural feeling of the outside, which was designed to feel almost like a farmyard, into the building. And slowly, as you move up and through the building, the elements of the agricultural materials step aside for more refined materials such as walnut. As we arrive at the top of the stairs, you look back, we're looking back into the hill, into the dining area. A void cut away on the south side drops light into the space, and a stair light there drops light into this space. Whoops, almost pressed end, sorry.
Back up.
Sorry, I've somehow pressed a button here that... There we go. Yeah. So, sorry about that. So, at the top of the stairs, if you can imagine that sliding door that we can see on the left, you arrive for the first time internally. You can see the wonderful views that the house commands. We've got an amazing kitchen on the left-hand side. Again, a very stark internal space, but all of those necessary spaces such as the utility and the pantry are hidden behind the high gloss white interior. The plasterboard is applied here where we've got surfaces running, otherwise the concrete being structural is exposed. Stepping closer into the room, you can see the kitchen in a bit more detail. So you can see that all of this has been worked in exacting detail to provide all of the things that the client wanted. They wanted this ability to have a completely clean space that was that allowed them to use the facilities of things like the utility out of sight and out of mind. Back to the stair and down this rather quiet space on the left. It was the private stairs down to the bedroom wing. Not everyone would use it, not everyone would notice it was there. It was subservient to the main stair. Downstairs, again in plan, we have the 3 bedrooms, this route here, and the north corridor that runs along the back, which you can see on the right there. And the master bedroom. They're interspersed in here are the sketches that are produced throughout the construction. They're done not particularly beautifully, not particularly with a lot of time, but they're there to communicate ideas to the contractor, those building the building, and to ensure that the ideas that we thought about from the early stages are brought through. Things like the headboards design, things like the way in which the shadow gaps run along the outside of the bedroom, so the concrete structure runs all the way around, and therefore the walnut flooring is just applied in the areas where it's felt to be appropriate. The master bathroom, getting a view out. Back up to the stairs. We're moving up through the building onto the top level, which was the pavilion we talked about. You can see there the connection with the existing barn. A frameless glass that wraps up and over and carefully knitted into the existing structure. Something that we detailed. We detailed the handrail, everything. Into the study, which faces south and has that wonderful pergola. And then up to the pavilion, which was the highest level, as I said, that commanded the wonderful views. And this was designed to be the most refined space. You can see the material has changed in this sort of room. We had more plasterboard, more walnut. And again, sketching to understand how that room was going to be used. The position of the fire, the fact that the fire rotates, so giving you two zones to sit and relax in. Again, there's the south elevation. What I'm going to do now is just flick through some of the photos of the exterior of the building and how that 3 terraces works through. Again, the landscape you can see is quite poor. These are just some recent snaps to show you the difference the landscape makes. So now I'm going to move on to a sister project, which has recently been completed and only photographed about a month ago. It's a sister of Stormy in the way that it's constructed into the hillside. It also uses exposed concrete. In this time, it's in the Forest of Dean, and so the materials are different as they should be for a different site. The purpose of showing you this is to talk about the different way in which 2 fairly similar buildings have been occupied. This is called the inside-outside house, and basically the idea was to create a single level that the hill, again we're on a hill, runs down and dresses over the roof. To get light in, and the namesake of the project, we created these courtyards that sit over the footprint of the existing building. You can see them here, they're heavily hatched. So this was the existing building that we took away. This was the existing building. This was the existing building. These were outbuildings to the main house. And so what we created were 4 courtyards with 4 distinct uses. You can see there's one of the courtyards. Another, again, landscape needing to develop. The 3rd one. And just through that valley there is the Severn Bridge. That's what the house looks like. So you can see it's a fairly modern, simplistic elevation that faces south and is the only real elevation of the building. As we move inside the house was created for 2 artists. You can see that we've created this north-lit gallery that run through the whole of the building to allow them to display their own and other people's art. And you can see instantly the difference in the way the house has been occupied. And little subtle parts of the design, such as this picture rail that runs on all of the concrete walls to allow them to hang their art, are the ways in which the house becomes truly bespoke. So those are the 2 clients working away in their studios. Into the sort of more conventional areas of the house, there's a kitchen, power floated concrete floor and concrete ceilings. And then these large expanses of south-lit space for them to enjoy. And you can see that their lifetime's worth of possessions have been sit there in a very comfortably in what can only be described as a modern interior. The courtyards then creating light and interest in what is a very deep plan building. And some dusk shots of the building. So in summary, I've talked hopefully fairly articulately, about 2 buildings, Stormy Castle, inside outside house, and this is just another of our other couple of projects where they've been created truly for specific people. We have been employed to understand their needs, understand their requirements, not only that, but also interpret the context of the site into a building that should add to the landscape and add to the concept. And I think that's what Loyn Co are proud to be good at, hopefully. And so, moving on to Victoria's talk, we'll see how the practice aims to do the same sort of detail and the same sort of approach to buildings where we don't have an end user, where it's designed to be sold to someone. Thank you.
So I'm going to talk briefly about a project, Porth Tiger, which is based in Cardiff Bay. And as James said, I mean, the way that we kind of sold ourselves to the client on this project, we were approached along with 3 other architects, and we said, look, we know what people want. We've worked with individuals for kind of 20 years, developing their houses, developing the spaces. We can give you the key ingredients and then try and tie that through into a multi-house project. Not all the houses are the same. They can work for different individuals in different ways. But how do we kind of take what we've got from those bespoke projects and apply that to kind of larger model? So the project started in the same way as all our projects, with the site and the client brief. We had a fairly prescriptive brief from Igloo, who were the developer for this project. And this was going to be their first residential development in Wales. So for them, it's quite a big deal. They've got a strong kind of background of design behind them, and they wanted to really deliver quite a kind of exemplar project and, create a new area of the city. So as important as the houses themselves were the kind of spaces between and the place we were creating, and that was a kind of, a big point that they kind of hammered home from the beginning. So they wanted well-designed townhouses, a mixture of 2 and 3 bedroom, 3 and 4 story, and perhaps some apartments. And because we didn't have a client in this instance, an individual end user, they identified these 2 kind of target markets that they were hoping the houses would appeal to. And they called these the next steppers and the empty nesters. And so the empty nesters are people like Chris, my boss, who's got 2 grown-out children who have moved out, are now working, got a nice kind of large family home, and is perhaps looking to downsize, but not necessarily lose all the space. But rather than having a big house full of empty bedrooms, you're looking for a house where you can entertain, where you can kind of enjoy your hobbies and still appreciate space, but use it differently. And then the next steppers is this idea of, it's not first-time buyers, but it's people who might be moving on to their second home. Perhaps they've got small children, and again, they're looking for a house that kind of meets their very specific needs in terms of storage and practicalities. But they're looking for a kind of new way of living that the existing housing stock in Cardiff might not necessarily kind of suit. It's a developer at the end of the day, so the big message was kind of pragmatic responses to things. Things had to work hard, and do more than one job. But the key was really the idea that we would be developing this identity to the site. So the site is in red at the bottom. I don't know how well you know Cardiff, which is the pointer. So we're down here. This is Cardiff Bay. And then basically the waterways that you can see here are the kind of dock infrastructure. So we've got Roath Basin, Queen Alexandra Dock, and then the larger dock going out into the estuary. And then the River Taff, which runs down through the city. And I think the way we've shown this map, it was to show the kind of key ingredients of Cardiff. I mean, Cardiff's quite commonly acknowledged as quite a green city. It's got a large city park, and it's a relatively green trail to kind of access the city centre and down to the bay. And then this is Cardiff city centre here. So we're slightly out on a limb. We've got the existing bay and the infrastructure there. But you can see there's no kind of greenery. There's not much residential. So we really wanted to bring some of this urban grain and some of this density down into this site. It's a very exposed site. It's marine conditions, so it's not going to suit a big kind of city park, but
So it was trying to think creatively about that landscape and how we could include that and make that work within our site. In terms of the context, this just kind of roughly gives an idea of the uses around the site. So you've got a huge portion of residential here on the other side of the Taff, and then you've got a lot of kind of industry wrapping around, a big kind of cultural centre in Cardiff Bay, where we've got the Opera House and various things, and then a very small kind of parcel of residential, and then we're the first phase of residential at Porth Tiger, which is the whole of this site, which is being regenerated. And we're the gateway in a way to the site and that connection with the existing context. So these are some photos of the existing, the not particularly inspiring existing apartments across the water from us. So these are the kind of people who potentially might live at Porth Tiger, and this is the community that we're engaging with as we're designing. And they're kind of telling us everything we're doing wrong based on where they're living. You know, we're showing an ungated, open community with overlooking and natural surveillance, and they tell us we have to be kind of gated and various things because of all the problems they've got with crime, because basically they live in a donut-shaped building that's all gated and got no surveillance things. So we're trying to learn the lessons of the existing context, but it's also quite, you know, in terms of the surroundings around the site, there's some quite prominent buildings, so we also have to think about how we sit within that. It's a low-rise scheme, but it also needs to have a sort of presence within there. And then you can see, you know, as you go around the dock, the kind of existing vernacular there, and the whole area is being regenerated, but you get a feeling, an idea for the views and things. The orientation and the location is really, really key to this project. We've got this huge expanse of water here at Roath Basin, so even on quite a quiet day, if you're stood on the corner of our site here, there's still quite a noticeable wind there. And then, you know, we've got a large south-facing area, but basically along the whole dockside here, we're kind of northwest facing. And so when we started to think about the site and the site layout, we had some quite key drivers. You know, we knew we needed some kind of buffer along here to work as a block. We wanted to really be able to use this to connect our houses with the waterside walkway that would continue all the way around the dock. But we wanted to lay out the property sensibly, so, you know, you still got your kind of principal living to the south here, and how do you use that northwest space? And then this is the main road which wraps around. A really key part of the client's brief from the off was front doors at ground floor level, basically, and they really wanted to animate this streetscape with those. So we had quite clear indications for the exterior of the site and the kind of periphery, and then one of the biggest challenges was thinking about the interior and how we make those properties kind of bespoke to the site and really unique to the character of their setting. The way that we approached the design philosophy of this project was macro-micro. So the macro was the site analysis, the wider context, how we connect to existing routes, what our climate's doing. And the micro was right at the beginning, thinking about the types of spaces we'd be creating, the idea of the inside-outside, but also continuing it. This is looking at the first floor where we're cutting spaces, external spaces into the dwelling as well. And that's just to give you an idea of the massing. So we ended up with some kind of larger properties on the kind of nodes of the site, and particularly where we've got much higher kind of surrounding buildings around us, and we're really trying to give ourselves a presence within that site. We've got apartments on the kind of main gateway access in on the kind of northeast of the site, and then these courtyard properties internally. And that's just to show that, you know, we weren't lying when we said that we have these internal crits and things and reviews, and, you know, you come up a lot better for them. In terms of the micro, I won't kind of dwell on it lots, but, you know, again, we're thinking about materials at this early stage of our master planning as well. So we set ourselves a kind of list of criteria, and then tested different material options against it. And we came out with masonry as the kind of most suitable, a lot to do with the durability and the locality of the site, really. It's, you know, when you're on a dockside site, I think we all felt that masonry kind of, well, you know, over time is the material that weathers the best. But I mean, the option, the images here are just to say the nature of the material. You know,
you can say brick, but then that opens up all a load of questions of what's the brick, how does it look? So, and then back to the macro. I've got a series of kind of perspectives which show the maps, and this is what I was talking about in terms of the taller properties to kind of respond to the surrounding context. And all of these, this is the approach up Fieldport Tiger, the main street, the properties on the right-hand side, and then the front gardens and doorways. This is the apartment block, and it's the really important thing that these are showing is first of all the landscape, because I think that's a really key part of the development, of any development. And the spaces between. So this is that main entrance of Fieldport Tiger, which takes you through and down to the dockside. And just gives you, these are the kind of views of the smaller streets. But you can see this idea of section now, how it's working with the streetscape. And we've got these greenhouses which pop up at roof level to access your terraces and hopefully give some protection to get away with some planting in there. And then the smaller lanes between. And these dockside properties. I'll look just at the end of the plan of this property. That gives it, so that's the apartments across the way. So this is the proposal basically that went into planning. You can see it's very similar to the scheme we've had at kind of concept stage. It's just been refined, kind of very iterative process. So I thought we'd come back, we started with houses, looking at housing, so back to the houses themselves, and this list of ingredients, which is, like I said, what we were when we were given the brief and the idea of these next steppers and empty nesters, we tried to think for ourselves personally, what that meant in terms of spaces, and also look at our existing client base and what people had been looking for, and asking for in those houses, and how we kind of tease out those ingredients and apply them to these houses. And we developed these series of kind of icons, almost as like a double checker, so we can look at a particular house type and say, yes, we have got the double high space, we have got the outdoor seating, or the extra storage, or it's almost, it's a good way for us to test ourselves and say, if you had a client who could sit opposite interrogating you, it's a way for us to kind of interrogate that. But we're still sketching, so it's not just becoming about kind of words and icons. So I've just the last few slides I'm showing. This is the courtyard houses I was talking about, and they're two-story. They're three-story when you take into account the kind of rooftop quad or roof level, but they don't look over these buildings, so they're very inward-looking. And we really wanted to create these spaces that worked as kind of one communal area in that way. So you can see they've got external terraces at ground level, and then their first floor wrap around to gardens as well, which sit on the first floor roofs, and then they go up to their roof gardens as well. And this is plans that we're kind of working on at 150. We had models at 150 as well, which apologies, I meant to put pictures in to be able to show. But this is us kind of walking the plan, to make sure that it's difficult with the developer. You do get squeezed on space, and it's only at the end when it's built that they'll turn around and say, oh, you can't get a wardrobe in there. So we've got to make sure, as we're going, that you have got wardrobe, dressing table, the spaces do work, and we don't end up kind of squeezed too much. We've got to be our own clients in a way and make sure that these houses are working for people. And this shows coming from the first floor on that property, the idea of the views out and how that space is working, and kind of making the most of the plan, organising. It's very well just to have a big open space, but actually one of the opportunities in terms of how people are going to live and occupy that space. And that's the roof garden. And that's the elevation of C. So you can see they're quite quiet, fairly kind of unassuming, but the idea is that it's really, it's once you get into the interior of the plan of that, you really start to enjoy it. And then the last one I was just going to show was these dockside properties along here. So again, at 1 to 50, these have got garages integrated into them, and they've got basically on our dockside we've got about a metre step between our entrance level here and this dockside here, and we didn't want our first floor to carry through and end up kind of towering above the dockside level. So we introduced a series of steps. When you come into the dwelling, you step about 4 steps down, so you're level with your external terrace, and then you're just a metre above the dockside there. So you've got a certain amount of privacy, still kind of well connected. And it also means that when you come down these stairs, because the head height's maintained, you get the volume of the space opening up. And there's a void which links you to the first floor above, which again, it's based on this. This is all south facing, so principal living spaces here. The northwest aspect I was talking about at the beginning becomes a kind of external west facing evening terrace, so it kind of responds to your dining on the inside outside there. So thinking about how these are working, specific to their site location. And then on the second floor, the idea of this pop out, because we weren't particularly inspired by the apartment you're looking at over here, we're trying to get kind of oblique views off and down towards the basin and the water views beyond there. And it also kind of gives the elevation of this property, which is probably towards the end, but it looks quite a different building from the kind of entrance side and the interior side and the dock side. And I just put these in because basically we're due to start on site hopefully in kind of early February reviews, so we're putting together production information at the moment. So it's really to show these plans. We're still inhabiting them for the benefit of the clients and ourselves to make sure that the space is still working. Again, I meant to include a sketch that we were doing yesterday to show the client for this space, where they suddenly decided they wanted to stick all storage under this stair, and actually we thought it was very important to keep that openness and keep that view through, and the perspective convinced them that's whatever. But we're still, it's not a kind of done and dusted deal. We're still interrogating and developing these as we go. Let's go up to the first floor. You see the 2 external spaces in the void. And then onto the roof. And that shows, so this is the street side elevation, and then you get the step down, and just in terms of the kind of the dock side response, you get the feeling of the different nature between property, between side and site. And we'll end on that slide, just because I think it's quite fitting. It kind of applies to whether we're looking at a one-off house or a large development, the idea of kind of internal and external volumes, and the kind of means or lack of means of separation between them. That's